Okay, everybody, welcome to class. First thing I'm going to do is share my screen as usual and look at the class notes. Here we are. Oh, let's go all the way to the top here. There we are. Okay, so here we are today, January 5th. We're going to continue with some of the ideas about formal communication and formal writing techniques. And then towards the end, we'll take a look at the MLA formatting and a few things related to that, all of which will help prepare you for the first essay you'll be writing, which we'll look at on Monday. Monday, we'll have a class where we will read together. We'll read part of the Declaration of Independence, and we'll talk about the inalienable rights and talk about the essay itself and how to structure that, what you want to do there. And hopefully you'll leave that class with a clear idea about what you want to write about. We will have also a class on Tuesday, chiefly because Monday is the kickoff for the first essay, and we'll probably want to talk a little bit more with everybody about what they're writing about, make sure everybody knows what their essay should be about. This week, I just want to go back. This week we have on the discussion board, we have the concept of human nature. Some of you may have been on there already. You should definitely go in this weekend and post something in the discussion about human nature. And when you do that, you should be practicing the formal writing techniques that we've been looking at. The other thing that you should do in preparation for Monday is take a look at that essay number 1 folder in the content area of Blackboard and do some of that background reading. It'll help you to manage concepts and to understand what's going on and when we read the document on Monday. So you should do those kind of things before Monday. And then next week, we will not have a class on Wednesday because you'll be writing your essay. And we will have a class on Thursday. And Thursday actually is when that first essay is due. So the turnaround time, let me admit everybody who's in the waiting room. Okay. The turnaround time is pretty fast for that first essay, with the first draft of that first essay. Hopefully we'll be able to look at a couple of drafts on Thursday in class. And once again, that will help everybody to get an understanding of what they need to be writing about, how to put it together, things of that nature. So that's a little review of what we'll be doing next week. Let me stop right there and ask if anybody has any questions at the moment about what we're doing, about where we're going, about what we're learning, what we've covered, any issues.
So I just got here. Can you tell me what you were talking about? Sorry for lateness.
Were you here yesterday?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, I did so far today was review next week, what we're going to be doing next week. Yeah, let's go back to that just real quickly. All I did so far was take a look at here. Here's today, here's Monday. There's some prep work you can do for Monday. Look at the folder for the first essay, and there's some background reading in there. And this will all be in the notes. You definitely get the notes and you can see where we're going for the next few days. That's really all we covered. Anybody else? Nope. Okay, so let's move on to, let me just check the chat here because some people are, okay, that's good. We share my screen again, and let's move ahead with the things that we need to learn about to do more formal writing. So the first thing I want to talk about is paraphrasing techniques. You may remember yesterday I talked about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is the writing skill that allows you to say the same thing, to express the same thought, but to do it in different words or in different arrangement of words so that your reader doesn't see the same pattern of words, the same words in the same sequence over and over again, and therefore turns off to your writing, stops thinking about your writing because they recognize what you're saying and they say to themselves, I know what this person's saying, why do I have to keep reading? So you definitely don't want that. You want your readers to continue to pay attention to what you're saying. So there are several techniques for paraphrasing. And here's the first one. The first one is to move back and forth between what we call active voice and what we call passive voice. So here's a sentence in active voice. The student placed the book on the desk. The reason this is active voice is because the subject of the sentence, in this case, the student, is actually doing the action that the verb says. The verb is to place, is placed. So here, the student is the subject, and the student is taking the action of the verb. The student placed the book on the desk. So we call that active voice. Whenever the subject is doing what the verb says, it's active. So one way, so the subject performs the action of the verb. One way to change that is to move from active voice to what we call passive voice. Passive voice is when the subject of the sentence is receiving the action of the verb, not taking the action of the verb. So here, the book was placed on the desk by the student. Here, the book is the subject of the sentence, and placed is the verb, but the book is not placing itself. Some outside agent, in this case, the student, is placing the book, so the book is receiving the action of the sentence, and we call that passive. Active when the subject takes the action, passive when the subject receives the action. Now look at these two sentences. The student placed the book on the desk. The book was placed on the desk by the student. They say exactly the same thing. There is no difference between the meaning of either of those two sentences. The difference really is in active voice, the emphasis is always on the subject of the sentence in a sentence. And so when the subject of the sentence is active, and it's the student in this case, so the emphasis is on the student. And here, the emphasis is on the book. In fact, you could write this sentence like this: the book was placed on the desk. That would be the sentence all by itself. And the agent, the individual placing the book on the desk, doesn't even have to be there. So that's just sort of to illustrate how it's the book here that's the most important part of this sentence. But the two sentences, in essence, say exactly the same thing. So if you were to write, and of course, these are just sample sentences. If you were to write this sentence in your introduction, let's say, and then in your first paragraph, you wanted to repeat that idea and say it differently, you could simply write the same sentence over, but do it in passive voice. It's true that your reader will recognize that you're saying the same thing you said before, but the reader won't recognize that until they finish reading the sentence. And since you didn't write exactly the same sentence over and over again, the reader won't necessarily feel that you're repeating it, just rather that the idea will echo in the reader's mind and they'll recognize what you're saying. That's important too, because you want them to understand, and they'll recognize that they understand what you are writing, what you're trying to communicate. So that's number one, first way to paraphrase anything. You could go from the active voice to the passive voice. Now, just want to say one thing about the passive voice in business. Usually the passive voice is frowned upon a little bit because business is one of those places where people want to be able to know who's responsible for something that may occur. And because then they can know who to blame or who to fire if it goes wrong, or I guess who to praise if it goes right. So business writing prefers the active voice rather than the passive voice, because the agent, in this case, the student, for example, is always clearly designated. Whereas this one, as I showed you, the book was placed on the desk. You don't even know who the agent is. And that's not so good in the business area. But for any other time, there's absolutely no benefit, no deficit for using active or passive voice. They both express the same ideas. So moving back and forth between the two of those is a fine way to do paraphrasing. Another way to do paraphrasing is to reverse the order of the words in the sentence, change the sequence around. So here's that original sentence. The student placed the book on the desk. here, it's active voice. We keep the active voice, but we just reverse the words. On the desk, the student placed the book. Clearly, these two sentences say exactly the same thing. They're both active voice. It's just that the words are in a different sequence. Once again, when the reader reads this, the reader clearly understands that you're saying the same thing, but since you've said it in a slightly different way, here the words are the same, but the order is different, they still need to read the whole sentence and think about the whole sentence before they move on. And again, if they recognize that you're saying something you've said before, that's okay. It's just they won't be turned off to it because you've said it in a different way. Keeping your reader's interest is really important when you're writing something. After all, you're going through all the trouble to write something, figure out what's important, struggle to express it in some way. You really want your reader to pay attention and to think about what you're saying. So any little thing that you can do, or even a big thing that you can do to keep your reader's interest is really important when you're thinking about writing something. Even if it's writing a letter to a company to complain about something, you still want to make sure that your point gets across, that you're clear, and that your reader is going to actually read what you've written. Okay, so here's the original sentence. The student placed the book on the desk. Here's the passive voice. The book was placed on the desk by the student. And here is the same sentence with the words reversed. By the student, the book was placed on the desk. Now, I realize some of these sentences might come across as a little awkward. I'm just using this particular sentence as an example for you, so you can easily see how the words can be reversed and the sequence can be changed, and how you can move back and forth between active and passive. When you write your actual sentences, feel a bit more complex, and it might not be as simple as I'm showing you here, but I'm showing you in a simple way just so you can understand exactly what it is. But right away, we already have 4 different ways of saying the same thing. So, and in your essays, you certainly will probably need to write your thesis statement 4 different ways. Here is just right away, you can see that you can generate 4 different sentences that say basically the same thing, just using these 2 techniques. But there's a little more. Another way to paraphrase, you might be more familiar with this, is to use synonyms. Synonyms are words that have the same meaning as other words. And in English, we have lots and lots of synonyms. And in fact, we have a special book called the Thesaurus that gives us a listing of synonyms. Of course, we have online, like with a word here, we have a little synonym function right down there, as you can see. So if I take the word voice and I right click on it and I scroll down to synonyms, you can see all these different synonyms that might be appropriate for the word voice. Of course, because the English words have different meanings, voice could be speech, your voice could be singing, voice could be opinion, voice could be expression. So there's lots of different meanings of the word voice. So the synonyms are all slightly different, but usually you can find a synonym that's fairly close to the word that you're using. As here, the student placed the book on the desk. There's that active voice. Here I will substitute using the active voice using synonyms. So instead of the word student, I use the word pupil. Instead of the word placed, I use the word put. Instead of the word book, I used volume. And instead of desk, I put workspace. Not the best synonym, but for illustrating purposes like this, I think it'll do. And so here you have substituting synonyms for the main words in the sentence. And basically, you have a totally different sentence. The student placed the book on the desk. The pupil put the volume on the workspace. I mean, it's clearly different sentences. There's no question that the reader might completely understand that you're saying the same thing, but would not recognize that you're saying the same thing until they finish reading that sentence, for sure. Here's that passive voice using synonyms. On the workspace, the volume was put by the student. So here's that up here, there's that passive voice sentence. Here's the passive voice sentence using synonyms. Again, totally different sentence. The words are all different, expresses the same thought. And then here's the reversed active voice using synonyms. On the workspace, the pupil put the volume, and then the reversed passive voice using synonyms. So once again, we have 5 or even 6 different ways of expressing the same idea. 6 simply because I didn't put this one down there. Different ways of expressing the same idea using active voice, passive voice, reversing, and using synonyms. So those are the, I'm pretty sure that's the end of that. Yep. Those are pretty much the basic ways to do paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is important for you. You may remember in the conclusion, I'm telling you to paraphrase your thesis statement, paraphrase your topic sentences. And so that paraphrasing skill is really important. Most people like to paraphrase using synonyms more than anything else. It's fairly easy. You just look up a synonym and plug it right in the sentence. But the others, the reversing the words and switching back and forth from passive to active voice, can also be really helpful to you when you do it. So think about that. Occasionally, when I read your essay, I might see that you've used the same pattern of words over and over again, either in 2 successive sentences or maybe a couple of times in the essay because you're beginning and you're thinking about what you're writing and you're just expressing it in the same way. So I might say to you, try not to use the same words over and over again. Try to paraphrase your own sentences a little bit. So you may see a comment like that from me if that's the case. Okay, let me stop there. And I think we got everybody. Nobody's waiting. That's good. Any reaction to the paraphrasing idea there? Anything you want to ask about or comment? Okay, we'll move on.
I just want to make sure that you email us the notes because
Yes.
I'm on my way home from work
Okay,
and I'm tuning in.
that's fine. So you all should have gotten an email with the notes. Yes, I hope so. I did send that. And also I post the notes in the announcement section of Blackboard. So there's 2 places you can always get the notes. And if for some reason, if for some reason you don't receive something from me that you think you should be getting, just email me. Send an email to me directly. I'm putting my email in there again. I'm on the computer quite often during the day. I teach other classes as well. So I'm constantly checking in the email. Sometimes I check it on my phone as well.
Okay. All right. I'll check again.
Okay.
I just seen the one from yesterday's lesson.
Okay, very good. All right, let's move on to the next set of things to look about. And here, now, we're going to take a closer look at grammar. Some of you might know all of this stuff, and it's just a review, as I mentioned the other day. Some of you might not have thought about this stuff for quite some time. The main reason I'm reviewing the grammar here now is so that when I make comments to you in your writing, I can refer to the grammatical terms and refer you back to this discussion or someplace else where you can learn more about the grammar, rather than having to explain everything while I'm commenting or reacting to your writing itself. So this will establish a little baseline for us. So just a quick review. What's a noun? A noun is the word for a person, place, thing, or idea. Nouns are the subject of the sentence usually. Nouns almost always come along with articles. Articles, these are the articles, a, any, and the. We call these the indefinite articles because they mean any, a peach or an apple. The, we call the definite article because it indicates a specific one. So when you say, a dog bit me yesterday, the emphasis is clearly not on the dog because we don't know what dog it is. It could be any dog. But when you say, the dog bit me on yesterday, I'm assuming you know which dog I'm talking about because I'm being very definite about a specific dog. Maybe one that tried to bite me before. And then we have pronouns. Pronouns take the place of nouns. They stand for nouns. we looked at a little bit at pronouns yesterday when we talked about first, second, and third person. And I'm saying to you, don't use the first and second person pronouns, use those third person pronouns. And we have adjectives. Adjectives are important words. They describe nouns. The way they describe them is they give you the quality or the quantity of a noun. So it could be a delicious peach, that would be quality, or it could be 10 peaches, that would be quantity. Colors and numbers are always adjectives. So adjectives go along with nouns. Make nouns plural. I mentioned this yesterday. You add an S to the noun or an ES if it ends in S. So I think I have some examples here. Yes. So apple, one apple, two apples with an S right there, but one dress like that, but two dresses with an ES like that. Just a little review. Then we have verbs. Verbs express actions, thoughts, or feelings. For example, when we have the verb in the infinitive form, we use that word to in front. To go, to do, to sing, to run, to hop, to jump. We call that the infinitive form of the verb. So occasionally I might say to you when you're writing, use the infinitive form of the verb here, and you would know what I'm talking about. I might even give you the example right there, but at least you know what I'm talking about. Now, verbs change their form depending on the noun or the pronoun that they're going along with. We say that nouns and verbs must agree. If the noun is singular, the verb should be singular. If the noun is plural, the verb should be plural. That's what we call the noun-verb agreement. And occasionally students need to be reminded of this in the essays themselves. Here, there is an apple, one apple singular. There are many apples, 10 apples plural. Okay. We call, how verbs change, we call that conjugation, that the verbs change depending on how, and depending on the noun or pronoun that they're related to in the sentence. Here's that chart we looked at yesterday. Same chart as yesterday. We're going to stay away from these, and we're going to use these in our formal writing. I put it together. I like, for me, the chart works really well because it reminds me of what I'm trying to do. And again, I'm just reminding you that third person singular with the regular verbs, that's where the S is, even though with nouns, the S means plural. With the verbs, the S usually indicates third person singular, with the regular verbs anyway. Then we have adverbs. Now, adverbs are really important. One reason that adverbs are really important is that most people don't use adverbs properly. And if you've learned or continue to learn your English from hearing other people speak, from listening to the radio, from watching TV, from watching movies, anything of that nature, most of the time, people are not using adverbs correctly. And that's very important for formal writing, because when you write correctly, when you use your grammar correctly when you're writing, it again gives the reader, earns more respect from the reader, more respect for your writing from the reader. And you want your reader to respect your writing. You want your reader to say, oh, this person writes well, or this person writes correctly. Because if, often if you can get the little things right, that means you're getting some of the big things right too. And the big things are the important ideas that you're trying to write about, that you're trying to communicate. So if you can get the little things right, it often helps for your reader to recognize that perhaps you're getting the big things right. If you don't, if you make a lot of grammatical mistakes, then sometimes your reader will just not bother reading what you're writing, or won't give it much respect, because they'll figure the person can't even put grammar together. How could they possibly put ideas together? It wouldn't be true. You can put ideas together without grammar, but when you're writing in a formal situation, you want the individual who's reading your writing to respect your writing. And one way to get respect is to have proper grammar. As I mentioned yesterday, another way to get respect is to have formal vocabulary, formal voice, formal structure. And grammar is really part of formal structure. So adverbs describe verbs. They give you the quantity or the quality of verbs. Remember, adjectives go along with nouns and give you the quality or the quantity of nouns. Pronouns, but nouns. Adverbs go along with verbs, and they give you the quality or the quantity of verbs. So what almost every adverb ends in ly, and almost every word that ends in ly is an adverb. Of course, here's some obsession words that end in ly that are not adverbs, they're conjunctions, these here, but most of the others that end in ly really are adverbs. So here, even is an adjective, but let me move this down. There we go. But evenly is the adverb. So here you have a sentence. You should distribute the rewards evenly. Right, here's the subject, you, here's the verb, should distribute, and then here's the adverb, because this is describing the way you should distribute things. And since it's giving you quality of distribution, it's an adverb. Now, you might hear most people say, you should distribute the rewards even, but that would be grammatically incorrect. You want to write evenly and use the adverb. Same thing here. The strong nurse readily helped the patient. Readily is the adverb because it's modifying, it's giving you a quality of how the nurse helped the patient. You could also say it this way, but this would be a very awkward sentence. The nurse helped the patient strongly. Nobody would say that, because even though that's a word, it's an awkward word, so you wouldn't want to really use it. But the nurse happily helped the patient. Sure, happily is the adverb, and it's modifying the verb to help, and so you need the adverbial form with the ly. Here's just a sentence. Here, the fox quickly jumped over the dog. Once again, quickly is an adverb modifying jumped, so you need the ly. So adverbs end in ly, describe the verb, and you need to be aware of them and use them. You might not use adverbs, you might not have been using adverbs much up until now, but you certainly need to recognize that adverbs go along with the verbs, and that's what you should be using when you're writing. These, unlike many of the things I said yesterday, here I'm giving you rules from grammar, right? This is the way you do it. You couldn't if you did it any other way in grammar, it would be incorrect. Here's an irregular adverb, which is good or better or well. And this people get wrong all the time. You're always asked the question, how do you feel today? And everybody answers, I feel good. But that's incorrect. You should be saying, I feel well. Here's a little chart. Here's the adjectives over here that go with the nouns. Here's the adverbs over here that go with the verbs. The quality is for adjectives, it's good, but for adverbs, it's well. And since this well is modifying the verb feel, I feel well, I feel bad, I feel whatever, put that back, you should be saying well. Now, it gets confusing because in the comparative form, it's the same. I feel better than I felt yesterday. Who knows whether you're using an adjective or an adverb? It's exactly the same word. I feel the best I've ever felt, right? Okay, same thing. You don't know whether you're using an adjective or an adverb because it's exactly the same word. So it's only here that it makes a difference. And you need to recognize that. Oh, I should be using the adverb. Just an example. This is an irregular. Notice there's no ly's involved here. It's just irregular. So adverbs are tricky. keep them in mind. I might find that you haven't used the adverb or adverbial form in your writing somewhere, and I might say you need to use an adverb here. You'll know what I'm talking about. Then we have prepositions. And prepositions are the words that tell us the relationship between things or among things. Here's a couple of prepositions. Between. This is technical. Between always goes with to. Between two things. You can stand between two things. But if there are more than two, you should use the word among. So you stand between two pillars, but you can stand among the people in the crowd. Again, this is something people use incorrectly. They'll use between three things. No, you can't be between three things. You can only be between two things. You can be among three things. Might sound a little awkward. Maybe you don't want to write it that way. Maybe you want to say it differently, which is fine. But it's technical. So just remember, between means two. Here's just a bunch of prepositions: over, around, through, all these different words, besides, on top of, underneath. These are words that tell you the position of things and the relationship among things. So prepositions are important. And one reason for formal writing that prepositions are important is you should try not to end your sentences with a preposition. There's a couple of times in formal writing where there are little rules like this. Yesterday, I was telling you, don't start the sentence with and. Use one of those other words like in addition or additionally. I said, don't start the sentences with because. Put that because in the middle of the sentence. Similarly, try not to end your sentences with a preposition. Don't say, that's where I'm going to. Now, of course, when you're talking with your friends, you can say it any way you want to say it because it's informal. But when you're writing, don't say that's where I'm going to. Say that is the place I am going. So you need to take that preposition and either eliminate it or move it into the middle of the sentence in some way. This is something that happens a lot when students write, especially in the beginning. It's hard to remember all of these rules, but occasionally I'll find that you've ended a sentence with the word to or the word of or the word with. And I'll say, try not to end your sentences with a preposition. You'll know what I'm talking about. Okay. Here's just an example. Here, don't say that's what I'm waiting for. Say that is for what I'm waiting. Now, this is an awkward sentence. Very awkward. This is a much more common sentence, but this is the formal sentence. If you don't like the way you've changed the sentence because you're not ending the sentence in a preposition, then write it in a different way. You have the power to write your sentences any way you want. You are the creator. You are the author. You should make them sound the way you want them to sound. If they sound awkward to you, they might well sound awkward to your reader. On the other hand, you should try to follow the formal writing advice and not end with a preposition. So you can do better than this, fine. I was just using this to illustrate how you move the preposition back into the sentence. So whenever that happens, whenever you are reviewing or editing sentences that you've written and you've changed them, you may have been using the same words, like here we use the same words, and you may say, oh, I don't like it. Well, okay, change it, fix it, do that. Occasionally, when you're writing and you send a paper to me, most of the time I will help you with the corrections. So if the sentence should be written slightly differently, I'll plunk in the other words or change the words around and show you a different color or something like that. Cross out what you shouldn't have written and write what you should have written so that you can see exactly what you should be doing. But occasionally you will write a sentence that I can't quite myself rewrite readily. And then I'll say to you, this sentence is confusing, or the sentence is awkward, or something like that. And you'll need to, since you know what you really want to say, you will have to rewrite it on your own. You'll see that happen occasionally. Okay, and so then we have a phrase. A phrase is a group of words that doesn't have a verb. For example, here, to the store. Right? There's no verb in there. You got a preposition, an article, and a noun. We call that a prepositional phrase because it starts with a preposition. Okay. here's another example. This really should be up here. Okay, this is a sentence that ends with the preposition, that's where I'm going to. And actually, you could just write, that's where I'm going. You don't need the to. So in a case like this, it's real easy to correct the sentence. You just eliminate that word to, which is a preposition at the end. And we don't want to end with a preposition. And it makes it a better sentence. So this is just vocabulary. This is what a phrase is. Then we have conjunctions. Conjunctions are the words that we use to join ideas together. I talked about and but yesterday. I said, don't begin the sentences with and or but. Here are again some alternatives that you can use to begin your sentences with. To mean but, you can use however, nevertheless, therefore, any of these words. Similarly, instead of and, you could use any of these words. These are simply our chief conjunctions. There are more conjunctions, but these are our chief conjunctions. This one for joining things, this one for making exception, this one for giving a choice. And then there's a special class of conjunctions called the coordinating conjunctions. And there's a special grammar rule that goes along with the coordinating conjunctions. I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, just sort of previewing it for you here so you can be aware of this. And there's no logical, I mean, there might be logical explanations for some of these other grammar rules, but there's no logical explanation for this one. This is just grammar. And we call these coordinating, the coordinating conjunctions have this acronym, fanboys. Here they are. There's only 7 of them. Where's the other one? Where did it go? Here it went. Let's move this up a little bit. There we are. So here are the fanboys. Or, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. You can see that the first letter of each word spells out the acronym fanboys. I will often be telling you, reminding you about fanboys because there's a special rule about commas and semicolons that relates to it. I'll cover it in just a moment. Just want you to be aware that this is coming up. All right, let's move on to sentences. And when we talk about sentences, we need that word clause. Remember, phrase is a group of words without a verb, but a clause is a group of words with a verb. So again, these are grammar terms. And a complete sentence is a sentence that has a subject and a verb, a predicate, a verb that goes along with it. And a sentence is, another way of calling a sentence is an independent clause. And so a sentence is an independent clause that expresses a complete thought. So here's one. That's a complete sentence. The subject is I, the verb is an, the verb goes along with the subject, it expresses a complete thought that I exist. So short sentence, 2 words can make a sentence. You definitely need to have complete sentences. Most of your sentences will be longer than 2 words. And sometimes you'll write a group of words and it won't actually be a sentence because you might be missing the subject or your subject might not connect with the verb. And then I'll tell you, this is not a sentence. And usually when it's not a sentence, I'll let you fix it because you can pretty much, rather than fix it for you, you can pretty much tell when I point it out, you can pretty much tell that it's not a sentence. So we have clauses, we have phrases, and then we have incomplete sentences, which we also call sentence fragments. You can also sometimes call them dependent clauses. You'll notice that an independent clause stands on its own because it expresses a complete thought, but a dependent clause, a sentence fragment, an incomplete sentence does not express a complete thought. And that's why it's incomplete. Yeah. So sentences are really important. I know you're pretty familiar with sentences, but every now and then when you're writing and struggling through a thought process, trying to express something, you may write something that looks like a sentence, and you didn't realize when you were proofreading yourself that it actually is not a sentence. By the way, one of the really good ways to review your writing, if you have this opportunity, you should really take advantage of it, is to read your writing out loud to someone else. I know it's a burden because you need to have someone who's willing to hear your writing, but that's really, really an excellent way for you to hear and for the other person to hear whether you have written in complete sentences and whether your sentences make sense, whether they really are sentences and express complete thoughts. You can also read them out loud to yourself. It's a little trickier because you have to monitor your own writing, but nevertheless, those are good techniques sometimes, if you need them, to help you improve your writing. I don't know why this little conjugation is here. Probably somebody asked me in class about that. But so this doesn't really serve any purpose here. Okay. Again, in the sentence, the subject, the noun or pronoun is the subject of the sentence, has to agree with the verb, the predicate that goes along with that subject. It needs to agree in number, singular or plural, and it needs to agree in case, first, second, or third person. Of course, in your situation, you're going to be focusing on third person, so everything should be in third person. Again, a sentence fragment is missing the verb, missing the subject, missing both of those things. And then we have this other class of sentences called run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are two or more complete sentences that are joined together improperly. That is to say, without the proper punctuation. Fanboys has a lot to do with this. I'm going to get to that in a minute, so I'll come back to that thought. We should be looking at punctuation first. And here we are, different punctuation marks. You know that the period belongs at the end of the sentence. A question mark belongs at the end of a question. An exclamation point also could belong at the end of a sentence, but we rarely use that in writing, in formal writing, because we're not trying to surprise our readers. We want to bring our readers logically to the same conclusion that we've come to. We have commas, which I'll talk about in a minute. And of course, there are these fanboys that we have to deal with. And then we have the colon, which is these two dots. And really, most of the time in formal writing, you just use that for a list if you use it at all. Almost never is there a requirement that you use the colon. There's this other punctuation called the ellipsis, which is the three dots, three periods together. And this means that some words have been omitted or left out from a quote. I'll show you a little later how that works. But you might see that when you're reading something, when you're reading a source, and there's a quote in the source, and the person didn't want to quote 150 words, they just wanted to quote the first 10 and the last 10. You might see those three dots in the middle called an ellipsis, which means that words have been left out. Here, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. You might recognize that sentence. That sentence uses all of the letters in the alphabet. But here, and suppose I was quoting that in my paper, just like that. But suppose I didn't want to quote the whole thing. I wanted to leave out the word jumped, then I would use the ellipsis in this fashion with the three dots. Three dots tells the reader something was left out. If you, the reader, wanted to know what was left out, you have to go back to wherever I got the quote from and read the original quote to figure out what I left out. You shouldn't leave things out of a quote that change the meaning of the quote. So if the word not is in there, don't just take the word not out and make the quote mean the opposite of what it really means. Be careful. You need to have some intellectual honesty when you're dealing with quotations. You can put that ellipsis at the end of the sentence, just like this. The brown fox, ... shows that the rest of the sentence is left out, or at the beginning, ... the lazy dog. So and again, this is an example of how you might use it for quotations, where you want to leave out some words because certain words that you want to quote are the important ones. Remember, your job as the writer is to focus on what's important. You don't want to put extra things in that are going to confuse or lead the reader in the wrong direction. You want to keep the reader focused on what it is you're talking about. And that's why sometimes you will leave words out of a quote, because those other words might take the reader down a path that you don't want, where you don't want to go. You want to keep the reader focused on what it is you're saying. And then we have a semicolon, a comma with a dot over it. And for all intents and purposes, the semicolon is really the same as a period, because the semicolon indicates the end of a complete thought, the end of a sentence. However, we use the semicolon to combine two or more complete sentences. That's because sometimes, even though you write a sentence, the man had lunch, period, and then you write the next sentence, he ate a ham sandwich, you don't want your reader to read the man had lunch, oh, it's the end of a sentence. And the reader goes away and comes back 2 weeks later and then picks up where the reader took off, he had a ham sandwich. No, you want the reader to read both of those sentences, both of those thoughts at the same time. So you write, the man had a ham sandwich, semicolon, the man ate lunch, semicolon, he had a ham sandwich. And then because there's a semicolon there, the reader will read all the way through to the period and get both of those thoughts together, just as you intended. So the semicolon's useful for that. And that's just fine. So here's some examples. Man went to the store to buy fruit, period. He bought apples, pears, and oranges. 2 sentences, 2 complete sentences, nothing wrong with them, no reason not to write it that way. Or you could write it this way. A man went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon. He bought apples, pears, and oranges. In this case, you wanted to use the semicolon because you wanted the reader to read the entire thing at once. Now you'll notice when you end the sentence and start a new sentence, period, then you need the capital for the new sentence. But when you use the semicolon, you don't use the capital letter. It's perfectly correct. Just a matter of choice. You choose how you want to write. There's almost never a requirement that you use the semicolon. However, if you do use it, you need to use it correctly, have it be separating 2 complete sentences, one on one side and one on the other. Here's another example. I went to the store to buy fruit, period. I bought apples. I went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon. I bought apples. The reason I put this here is because, of course, with I, it's always capitalized, whether it's the end of the sentence or you've used a semicolon in there. Mary went to the store to buy fruit. Mary bought apples. Mary went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon. Mary bought apples. Again, just illustrating that you would, if it's a proper name, you would use this capital letter after the semicolon. So here are some correct and incorrect examples. Man went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon. He bought apples, pears, and oranges. Incorrect. A man went to the store to buy fruit, and then the capital H. That would make it incorrect. Or a man went to the store to buy fruit, comma. He bought apples, pears, and oranges. You can't use a comma to separate 2 complete sentences. If you have 2 complete sentences, you need a semicolon. Technically, we call that a comma splice. Often, you will write sentences where you will want to use a conjunction to join the sentences together. For example, here, this doesn't join them together, just the example. A man went to the store to buy fruit, period. And then you want that conjunction. Therefore, he bought apples, pears, and oranges. So when you use a conjunction like that, you put a comma after the conjunction. I have some other here. If you want, this is 2 sentences. If you wanted to make it 1 sentence, man went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon, therefore, comma, he bought apples, pears, and oranges. No capital here. Perfectly fine sentences. You choose the way you want to write. You choose whether you want to join the ideas together with a therefore, with a conjunction or not. Up here, we didn't do that. But sometimes it's more effective because you're making the connection. Remember, conjunctions make connections. You're making the connection more strongly for your reader. Man went to the store to buy fruit, period. Consequently, comma, he bought apples, pears, and oranges. Man went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon, consequently, comma, he bought apples, pears, and oranges. So really what I'm just illustrating here is the pattern of using the semicolon and then the conjunction and then the comma when you combine these. Commas are very tricky, so I'm introducing some of these ideas rather gently so that you can see the proper way. And often you will use the comma and the semicolon together in that fashion. Once more, man went to store to buy fruit, semicolon, he bought apples, period. He bought apples. I don't know why that's there. Okay. And now we have what's really important, which is the exception to the rule. It's a terrible thing. There's no logic for this. However, it's a matter of being grammatically correct. And once again, when you write in a grammatically correct fashion, your reader, especially your college professional readers, should recognize that you're using proper grammar, or conversely, when you're not using proper grammar, they should recognize that you're not using proper grammar. And once again, when you do use proper grammar, then you will get more respect for your writing. So here's the big exception for using semicolons. And that's when you use a fanboy as the conjunction to connect the sentences. Up here, we use these conjunctions to connect the sentences. But down here, I'll show you how it works with any of the fanboys. Remember, these are the fanboys: or, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. A man went to the store to buy fruit, semicolon, and he bought apples, pears, and oranges. No, no, no. This needs to be a comma. A man went to the store to buy fruit and he bought apples, pears, and oranges. You got a complete sentence here. You got a complete sentence here. You're joining them with one of the fanboys. You need a comma. I think I have it correct. Yes, here it is correct. These are all the correct ways to do that. Man went to the store to buy fruit. You want to use and, you need a comma. Up here, we used consequently or therefore. We needed a semicolon and a comma. But down here, when we're using and, one of the fanboys, then we just use a comma. Or even here, man went to the store to buy fruit, so he bought apples. Once again, so is one of the fanboys. We connect those two complete sentences with a comma rather than a semicolon. So this happens frequently in writing because this is one of those rules that's real tricky. And it's so small, right? What's the difference? A comma, semicolon, just one little dot. So if I find that you needed a fanboys comma somewhere, I will simply say in your writing, in your feedback, I'll say fanboys comma needed. Or the opposite, maybe you put a comma in when you needed to put in a semicolon. I will say semicolon needed for two sentences, not a comma. So we're reviewing it now. So if you get that kind of feedback when you're writing, because you've made those kinds of grammatical errors, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And you can always refer back to these notes. Okay. So really, that's the key grammar rule about commas that I wanted you to know. And it's a tricky one, so don't feel badly. There's my adverb, badly, right? Don't feel badly. Don't feel badly if it takes you a while to get used to the fanboys comma. Okay. There's another aspect of grammar that you might not be aware of, which is, again, something that people do not use when they're speaking. And this happens day in and day out. Occasionally, when I listen to TV or newscasts or something like that, occasionally I'll hear somebody use this correctly. But almost all the time people speak incorrectly with regard to this. But nevertheless, here you are. It's called the subjunctive tense. The subjunctive tense is a tense, special tense in English that we use, in not only English, other languages have this too, to express doubt. And we're always expressing doubt when we use the word if. The word if means doubt. We don't know, right? If, it's unsure, right? So we need to use the subjunctive whenever we start sentences or use the word if in a sentence. That's the bad news. The good news is there's only one verb in English, only one verb in English where the subjunctive tense is different than the past tense. And that's with the verb to be. So this is the only time with this one verb that you have to be aware of the subjunctive, which is why people make the mistake all the time, because it's just one singular thing. Here we go. I'll move down a little bit. Here's the past tense. Past tense is I was, you were, he was, we were, you were, they were. It's all the past tense. The subjunctive tense, I were, you were, he, she were, we were, you were, they were. So it's different here in the first person, and it's different here in the third person. And of course, here in the third person is where you're going to be writing. So that's where you really need to be aware of the subjunctive. So if the sentence is, you might hear, if I was rich or if I was poor, and that's incorrect because of the word if. You need to use the subjunctive, and so it should be correctly written, if I were rich or if I were poor. So it can be not if I was, but if I were, or if he were rich, or if he were poor. Tricky business. The subjunctive, just be aware of that issue of doubt. Here are another couple of words in English that we use to express doubt, perhaps, maybe, just like if. So be a little bit aware of that. If he were smart, not if he was smart. Not if I was smart, I would do such and such. If I were smart, because it's the subjunctive tense. Might sound very funny to your ear, probably should sound funny to your ear, because usually it's I was, or he was, she was. But in English, this is a rule, subjunctive. Once again, this is, excuse me, this is one of those rules, this is a true rule. And if you do use the subjunctive correctly when you're speaking and when you're writing, then those, like college professors who should know about the subjunctive, they should be able to recognize that you're using those words correctly. Or if you don't use it, they should recognize that you're using it incorrectly. I'm spoiled. I know this stuff really well. I teach it, so it's on my mind all the time. So when I hear people speaking incorrectly, it really jars my hearing. That might not be the same for all college professors, but there you are. Just so you know, some of us have that actual experience. Okay, this is the last thing we're going to do today, so just please bear with me. We're going to look at commas. Commas are the hardest, the most difficult punctuation to master in writing. So I make mistakes, still make mistakes with commas. So don't expect, although some of you probably better than I am, don't feel badly if you don't master the commas completely. But I have a short list here of some of the most frequent uses of the comma that you should be aware of. And I do say, when in doubt, leave it out. It's far better to not have a comma where a comma should be than it is to have extra commas where they don't belong. Okay, so definitely when, and here's something you're going to be saying in your essays often, you're going to say, for example, or such as, you need to use the comma before and after. So here's an example. A man bought fruit, comma, for example, apples and pears. Or a man bought fruit, comma, such as apples or pears. So we put those commas on either side of that, for example, or that such as. We certainly use commas in a list. Man went to the store and bought apples, comma, oranges, comma, pears, and orange, just like that. Here, this, you'll notice these two, apples, oranges, apples, I have oranges twice, that's terrible. Apples, pears, and oranges, you'll notice, and down here, apples, pears, and oranges. Here, I have a comma after the word pears. Here, I do not. This is totally optional. It's called a Chicago comma, different style of writing. If you want to include a comma before the and in a list, you can do that. The only thing I asked you to do, and you really should do, is to be consistent in the way that you write. So if you have a list in one sentence and you left the comma out, and then you'll have a list in another sentence and you put the comma in, you shouldn't do that. That's just showing your reader that you don't know where to put the commas. Personally, each of you should just adopt a style that you're comfortable with. Either use the comma before the and at the end of a list or leave it out. It's entirely up to you. Just be consistent. Consistency is really an important thing. There it is, be consistent. We use the comma after introductory words in a sentence, words or phrases. Here's just a bunch of examples. You might start any of your sentences with words such as this, according to the author, or moreover, or furthermore. Whenever you have an introductory word or phrase, you put a comma at the beginning of a sentence, you put the comma after it. This is something I frequently have to remind students about. So once again, you might see when I'm correcting your essay, I'll put a comma in there. Sometimes I'll just put the commas in and mark them in red. Sometimes when I mark them in red, they're too hard for you to see. So sometimes I'll mark a couple of letters around the comma so that you can see that I've made a correction there. So if you see it, if you left out the comma and I put it in like this, you should know there's nothing wrong with the N here, just that you left out the comma. And yes, I do go into great detail when I review your papers, and I go from spelling and punctuation and grammar all the way up to ideas and coordination and everything else, structure, voice. So you'll get very detailed feedback from me. Expect that. We use the comma to set off words in the middle of a sentence. We call these descriptors, or the more technical term, grammatical term, appositive. So here, I showed you that with the for example, such as just above. But here's a sentence. The little match girl, comma, who does not have a name, comma, is the main character in the story. Now, these words set off by commas don't really need to be in that sentence. This sentence could easily be, the little match girl is the main character in the story. That's the sentence. But this descriptor, these words here in the commas, tell you a little bit more about the situation, that she also, not only is she the main character, but she doesn't have a name. And so when you write it this way, you need to set off that descriptor with commas. Some of you might be more comfortable doing exactly the same thing with parentheses. Here, the little match girl, parenthesis, who does not have a name, parenthesis is the main. There's no difference between these two sentences. Just showing you, you can use commas there to set off the descriptor. You could use parentheses to set off the descriptor. Some people think that the parenthesis interrupts the line of thinking of the reader more than the comma does. So they prefer to use commas rather than parentheses. It's entirely up to you. Here's another one. My friend Tom is a great guy. Really, the sentence is, my friend Tom is a great guy. But I added, the sentence is, my friend is a great guy. That's the sentence. But I added the word Tom just to give you his name. And since it's a descriptor, I set it off with commas. Then there's the fanboys, which I just talked about. You use those fanboys instead of semicolons when you put together two sentences. And then I think this is the last one. We use commas when we put together an independent clause with a dependent clause. Here's an independent clause. The nurses would constantly give us updates, period. Perfectly fine sentence. Then here, the nurses would constantly give us updates, even over the phone as promised. Well, this part, even as over the phone as promised, this part is not a complete sentence. It's a dependent clause. And because it's a dependent clause, not a complete sentence, it needs to be joined to the independent clause. And the way you join it is with a comma, not a semicolon. Here, if you wanted to use a semicolon, you'd have to write it this way. You'd have to have a complete sentence here and a complete sentence here. The nurses would constantly give us updates, semicolon. They do this even over the phone as promised. So again, it's just some different grammatical ways to put things together. I know. It's the last of the grammar. Let's stop with the grammar a minute. I have 10 more minutes of MLA stuff to show you. So rather than take a break, let's persevere with the 10 minutes. I just want to stop here for a second because I covered a lot of grammar stuff. See if anybody's got any reaction to that in any way. This little pause is taking the place of a break in the class. All right, I want to show you the MLA stuff. I will be showing you the MLA stuff several times. So this is really just an introduction to the MLA. It's something you will need to learn, you'll need to use throughout your college career. As I've mentioned before, some of you in other disciplines like nursing will have to learn the APA formatting, which is very similar to MLA, slight differences about where you put the periods and where you put the commas, things like that. But for this class, begin with MLA. Some people think MLA is easier, but I don't think it is. I think it's just as difficult as the other one. Okay, here comes the MLA style. First of all, title page. Your title page for MLA should, well, actually, I'll bring it up and give you an example of what it should look like. Here we go. Okay, so this is from the Purdue OWL site, and it's the sample MLA paper, which is a really good place to go to learn about how to put together an MLA style paper. I'm not going to go over the whole paper with you. I just want to show you the title page. And basically, this is the way the title page looks. It's not a separate page. It's simply a heading with your name, my name, the name of the class, and the date. So when you hand in your paper, when you hand in your first draft, try to have this heading on the first page of your paper with those 4 things. I have this link here actually in the notes, so you'll be able to get back to this page on the internet real easily. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like. And you are supposed to also have a header, a running header with the page numbers. And word processing programs such as Word have a function for that. I'm not going to look at it with you today. If you're not sure about that, we'll spend some time in a different class looking at that. But also try, when you hand in your papers, to have the running header and the page number. All right, so that, and page number changes. See, here would be page 2. It's a running header. Same thing, your last name, and then page 3, just like that. And try to put this information on the front page. These little boxes here, this tells you what to do. So when you get back to this page, you can see the instructions there. Let me stop sharing that. Let me go back to the class notes. Yes. Bring that up. Okay.
Professor,
Yes, yes.
on Blackboard, the header that we were given, it was in a different format. It was like name and professor's name and date right across.
Okay, well, MLA, the OWL is the, I might have put it in there incorrectly. The OWL is the Bible for how to do MLA. So try to follow the OWL. And I'll go fix what I did if it's wrong. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, let's go back to the class notes. These are the few things that you really need to know about MLA style. The title page format. You need to know that the list of sources that you use is called works cited, and it's a separate page. Here, I'll go down. Nope, I don't have it. Yeah, here it is. Your works cited page would look like this. And the title, it's a separate page, and the title of the page is works cited. To cite means to make a reference to something. And then you would have your list of sources. And the list of sources would be in alphabetical order by the last name, and would be in this hanging indent format, where the first line is flush with the left-hand margin, and then the second and third lines, if there are indented, sort of the opposite of a paragraph. Okay, this is back to the notes. So this is in the notes here. Here's the Purdue OWL link. Here's the link to the sample paper of Purdue OWL. So you'll be able to get there easily. There are two types of references, ways that you can reference a source in your paper. One is called parenthetical, and the other is called narrative, the parenthetical style or the narrative style. In the parenthetical style, you put the author's last name and the page number in parentheses at the end, and then the period comes. Here's an example. The First Amendment grants freedom of speech. There's the quote, and here's the source, open parenthesis, author's last name, page number, close parenthesis, period. There's the little pattern, no comma. In APA, by the way, there's a comma, which is one of the things that gets it very confusing. No comma, you don't use the word page, you don't use P, just put the number there. And you'll notice that the period belongs after the parenthetical citation. You might think that the period should be over here at the end of the sentence, but it's not. It belongs way back here after the closed parenthesis. So often I have to make that comment on student papers because getting used to the MLA style is tricky for everybody. So you might see my comment, period belongs after the closed parenthesis. You might see that a couple of times on your paper before you actually get used to doing it that way. So that's for the parenthetical citation. Here is the narrative citation. The difference in the narrative citation is you mention the author's name in the sentence itself. And therefore, at the end of the sentence, you no longer need to put the author's name because it's over here in the sentence. You just need to put the page number. The period still belongs at the end after the closed parenthesis. So these are the two ways that you have for including a quote in your paper. For your first paper, which we'll talk about more on Monday, you definitely want to have a work cited. One of the works that you will cite, one of the items in the list will be the Declaration of Independence. I will give you that citation, so you have it. We'll do that on Monday. And you'll definitely have, in addition to the Declaration of Independence, one other source that you find on your own on the internet that you quote from in your essay. So this is important. You need to learn the MLA style. You need to incorporate quotations in your essays. You can certainly quote from the Declaration of Independence itself. That's fine, you'll have that. But then you'll also need to find one other source to include in your works cited that you will quote from in your essay. The works cited is a list of sources that you be quoted from in your essay. Okay, enough. I know I gave you lots of detail today. Again, I don't expect you to know everything at once. I expect you to learn it over the next six or 7 weeks. Some of you will get a lot of it really quickly and only have a few more things to learn. Some of you will still make a lot of mistakes in the first essay. That's okay. This is a cumulative course. it matters most how you do at the end, not how you do at the beginning. You're supposed to be acquiring these skills and learning these skills. So don't feel badly if it takes you a couple of essays before you get the swing of how to do things, but certainly do your best to tackle the ideas that I've presented to you in terms of formal voice, formal structure, formal vocabulary, and the grammar issues and things like that. And when you go to write your first essay, try to incorporate as much of those things as you can. And again, I'll give you real detailed feedback. So if you miss something, I'll be pointing it out to you, not to worry. And we will go over some essays in class. And so you'll see other people's writing and you'll see how, and I will point out, this is done correctly, this is not done correctly. So you'll be able to see how it works out in actual practice. You definitely should go to the discussion board in Blackboard and post there and practice your formal writing in Blackboard. Even if you just write one sentence, I'm going there now. Even if you just do one sentence in the discussion, it's a good place to begin to practice your formal writing. And I see nobody's been in there yet. So definitely do that. Definitely go this weekend. You should definitely go to the discussion. Let's bring that up in there.
Professor,
Yes,
it doesn't have to be 50 words. It just has to be a sentence.
one sentence is fine. If I said 50 words, I was just being encouraging. Here it is, right? Here you can see the discussion now. What is human nature? And no, I don't put 50. I took out 50 words. Definitely want you to use formal voice, formal vocabulary if you can. So go in there. Now, if you need some thoughts about human nature, I'm going to move over to the content area and scroll down to the critical thinking folder, which is right here. And in the critical thinking folder, I've put some of my thoughts about human nature. So you can certainly read what I wrote, and maybe it's one or more of the ideas that I presented here you might agree with, you might disagree with, might make you think of something else. Write your own sentence and post it in there. Also, in the content area, I just want to remind you that, again, I'm going to scroll all the way down. Here's the essay number 1 folder. In the essay number 1 folder, I have a little history of the world and a history of the United States. And those two things you might want to read through, especially if you don't have much experience with history and you haven't looked at history in a while. Those are just very general discussions about history of human beings and the history of the United States, which might, especially the history of the United States, might give you a better handle on some of the ideas we talk about with the Declaration of Independence next week. So, you're not getting tested on those things, you're not getting quizzed on those things. But reading, I haven't said this really very strongly, reading is the flip side of writing. As you know, everything that you write, other people are going to read. And so if you practice your reading skills, it will certainly improve your writing skills, because the better reader you are, the better writer you are. Just like the better writer you are, the better reader you are. And so those two things really go hand in hand. So it is a good idea to do some reading if you can. And these days, many people don't do a reading of several pages at once or anything like that. You read things that are much shorter. So I gave you those little introductory essays that I wrote in there about the history of the world and about the history of the United States, so that you could do some practice reading. Okay, enough of that. All right, so there you have all the things that I need you to learn this term. There are a few other things I'll be showing you. I'll certainly reinforce some of these things in future classes, but really what we covered yesterday and today are the bulk of what you need to master when you're learning to write at the college level here in this class. Okay, questions, complaints, problems, issues, something that's confusing, something I didn't explain well, anybody not sure about what to do? I'll send you the class notes in an email. I'll post the class notes in the announcements section of Blackboard. And I haven't been able to get the recordings up on Blackboard, so I've been putting them on YouTube, and I sent you those links. So hopefully you got those if you need to review the class again or some section of it. Okay,
No questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
okay, very good. Have a good weekend, everybody. I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
I will send you the link for the classes
Bye,
next
sir.
week.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Day
Thank you, Professor. Have a good day.
two. Bye-bye.